You know what's funny about history? It always thinks it's the first time something's happened. Every generation thinks it's discovering something new, breaking new ground, making first contact with the unknown. And that's exactly what humanity thought when we landed on the moon. We planted our flag, we took our pictures, we left our footprints in the dust and congratulated ourselves on a job well done. We thought we were first. Turns out, we were dead wrong. My name is Dr. Elliot Grayson, astrophysicist, historian, and part-time conspiracy enthusiast, depending on which of my colleagues you ask. Officially, I'm with the United Nations Space Research Division, tasked with studying potential extraterrestrial records in the universe. Unofficially, I was the poor bastard assigned to read through thousands of pages of alien historical archives after first contact, trying to figure out what the galaxy actually thought about humanity. And that's when I found the reports. Not human reports, not even recent ones. Ancient reports. Buried deep in the archive of a long-extinct alien species, I found an entry that changed everything. A report from 5,000 years ago, written by an alien species that didn't even have a name anymore. It was short, but direct. Sector 4, Z43, the third planet's satellite. No survivors. Do not approach. Now, normally, that wouldn't be too concerning. A lot of planets had warning markers. Space is terrifying, and some places just kill things. But here's the problem. Sector 4-Z4-3. That was our solar system. The third planet's satellite. That was our moon. And this was only the beginning. It started as a curiosity. I figured maybe it was a mistake, a clerical error. Alien civilizations had bureaucracy too, right? I mean, it was one entry, and the species that wrote it had been dead for millennia. But then I found another one, then 3 more, then 10, each from a completely different civilization. All of them left the same warning. Do not land on the third planet's satellite. Every single civilization that had attempted to land on Earth's moon vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, no explanations. Just gone. I did what any rational scientist would do when confronted with an impossible discovery. I grabbed way too much coffee, locked myself in my office, and started a deep dive into the most horrifying research binge of my life. And the deeper I looked, the worse it got. The timeline didn't make sense. The disappearances weren't random. They were progressive. The first recorded attempt to land on the moon was 1.2 million years ago. Some species called the Zal-Theri had sent a scouting crew there, only for their entire expedition to vanish without a trace. Then another species, hundreds of thousands of years later, tried again. Gone. Then another. And another. Each one separated by thousands of years. Each one making the same mistake. And here's the part that made my blood run cold. The gaps between disappearances were shrinking. The first landing attempt, 1.2 million years ago. The next, 900,000 years ago. Then 500,000. Then 250,000. Then 100,000. Then 50,000. Then 12,000. Then 3,000. Then 1,000. And then? We landed in 1969. The exact pattern of disappearances had brought it right to us, and we had already stepped onto the surface. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the records in disbelief. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to write it off as misinterpretation or coincidence, or maybe even an elaborate prank by some bored alien historian with a sick sense of humor. But the deeper I looked, the worse it got. Because none of those civilizations ever sent a second mission. Ever. Even the most powerful empires in galactic history, species that had conquered entire arms of the Milky Way, never returned to our moon. Why? What did they see? And more importantly, why were we still here? I sent my findings to the highest level of command in the Galactic Research Council. I expected them to laugh at me, to call me insane, to tell me I'd been staring at ancient data for too long. Instead, I got one response. From High Chancellor Varys herself, a single message. Do not ask these questions. The answers do not lead to survival. And that's when I realized the entire galaxy already knew, and they were terrified. But here's the problem. We weren't asking these questions before, but now that we knew something was wrong, now that we knew the pattern had reached us, now that I had proof that humanity's first step on the moon might have triggered something bigger than we could ever imagine, now we couldn't stop. Because if every other civilization vanished after stepping foot on the moon, then the real question wasn't what happened to them. It was, why is it taking so long for it to happen to us? And how much time do we have left? There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that your entire species is on a cosmic countdown timer, and nobody told you. For decades, we celebrated our first steps on the moon. We made movies about it. We put it in history books. We sent more missions, built landers, and even talked about colonizing it. Meanwhile, every other civilization that ever set foot on the moon had vanished without a trace. And we were still here, for now. But the question that kept me up at night was, why? I tried to let it go. I really did. But once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. So I did what any self-respecting scientist does when faced with the worst cosmic mystery of all time. I dug deeper, and that's when I found the signal. It started with a background anomaly picked up by an old lunar probe. NASA had recorded it decades ago, back in the Apollo era, but it had been filed away and forgotten. Just another piece of space noise. But it wasn't noise. It was a transmission, a pulse, repeating in intervals, originating from deep beneath the lunar surface. It was so faint, so quiet, that it had taken thousands of years for any species to detect it. And when they did, they landed, and then they were gone. Now, maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But I wasn't the only one who noticed. Because 2 days after I found that transmission, I got an encrypted message from someone very high up in the Galactic Council. It was a name I recognized, Admiral Kazath. And if you don't know who that is, let me translate. Admiral Kazath is the kind of person that entire planets go quiet for. When he speaks, empires listen. When he moves, fleets follow. And he had one thing to say to me. You need to stop looking. Not, this is nonsense. Not, you're wrong. Not, haha, silly human. Number, you need to stop looking. Which is exactly the kind of thing you say when someone is dangerously close to the truth. So, naturally, I did the exact opposite. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. I pulled every classified record I could access, mission logs, private reports, even deep space probes that had nothing to do with Earth. And what I found, it still haunts me. It turns out we weren't the only ones watching the moon, because since the day humanity first landed there, at least 7 different alien civilizations had been monitoring us, watching, waiting, tracking our every move. The Valith Ascendancy had stationed deep space sensors in our solar system within months of Apollo 11. The Zareth Dominion had deployed cloaked surveillance probes by the time we launched Apollo 17. Even the notoriously isolationist Quorath High Order, who wouldn't talk to anyone unless their species had existed for at least 1 million years, had suddenly taken an interest in Earth the moment we set foot on the moon. But here's the thing that really made my stomach turn. Not a single one of them had ever sent a ship to investigate. They were all watching, but none of them would go back, as if they were waiting to see what would happen to us. And when nothing did, that's when I realized we weren't the anomaly, we were the experiment. I tried to warn people. I sent my findings to NASA, to the ESA, to the UN. Nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to believe that humanity had just unknowingly stepped into a cosmic death trap. Then the first astronaut disappeared. It happened last month. Commander Michael Ross, one of the lead engineers for Project Artemis, was scheduled to take part in an orbital survey of the moon. Nothing unusual. A simple pass over the South Pole, mapping out terrain for future landers. His ship left orbit. It never came back. No distress call. No malfunction warning. No wreckage. Just gone. The official report says it was a navigational failure. But you want to know what they're not telling you. His ship's last recorded signal. It came from inside the moon. We weren't the first ones to land on the moon. We were just the first ones who didn't vanish immediately. And now, something is watching us, waiting. And the real question isn't why the others disappeared. It's why haven't we? And how much time do we have left? You ever have that moment where you realize you've screwed up way more than you thought? Like, you thought you left the stove on, but actually your entire house is on fire. That's how I felt 2 days after Commander Ross vanished, because that's when I found the second signal. And this one? It wasn't coming from the moon. It was coming from Earth. Let me back up. After Ross disappeared, NASA quietly shut everything down. All future moon missions, scrapped. Public explanations, vague PR statements, private explanations, a whole lot of radio silence. I tried reaching out to my contacts. The same people who never stopped talking suddenly weren't answering my calls. And then, as if the universe just wanted to make sure I never slept again, something pinged my system. At first, I thought it was just a glitch. But when I checked the source, it wasn't just a signal, it was a response. The first signal, the one coming from the moon, was nothing but a faint pulsing frequency, repeating, always repeating. But the second signal, it was matching it, not randomly, not echoing it, matching, like a reply, like a conversation, and it was coming from deep beneath Earth's surface, which was impossible, because as far as we knew, there was nothing down there. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence, that there was some natural explanation I hadn't thought of yet. But then I made the biggest mistake of all. I ran the timestamps. The first recorded signal from the moon had been detected over 1 million years ago. The second signal, the one coming from Earth, it started in 1969, the same year we landed on the moon. And that's when I realized we hadn't triggered something by landing on the moon. We had woken it up. I did what any rational scientist would do. I locked my doors, drank a gallon of coffee, and immediately started cross-referencing every deep space transmission we'd ever recorded. And that's when I found the worst piece of evidence yet. Because Earth's signal, it wasn't just responding to the moon, it was talking to something else, something outside our solar system, something far, far away. And whatever it was, it had just started talking back. I sent my findings to the highest levels of command. NASA, the UN, the Galactic Council. I didn't get an answer. I got a visit, a very unfriendly visit. The men who showed up at my apartment weren't government. They weren't military. I wasn't even sure they were human. All I knew is that they had clearance above anyone I'd ever met, and eyes that didn't blink. They sat me down. They didn't threaten me, didn't raise their voices. They just gave me a choice. You can stop looking now, or we can make sure you never look again. And the worst part, they were scared, not angry, not irritated, scared. And that's when I knew they weren't trying to protect me from the truth. They were trying to protect the truth from me. But here's the problem. When you threaten someone like me, you don't make them stop. You make them obsessed. And now, I wasn't just looking for answers. I was looking for who else knew. And more importantly, what are they so afraid of? I pulled every classified file I could get my hands on. I traced every restricted transmission, every black site report, every redacted mission log connected to the moon. And that's when I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Something buried so deep that whoever wrote it had tried to erase it from history itself. A single document, dated July 20th, 1969, the day humanity landed on the moon. It wasn't a mission log. It wasn't a report. It was an emergency broadcast, a signal that had been transmitted from the Apollo 11 lander. But not to Earth, to something else. And the message? We are here, awaiting response. And beneath it, in hastily written notes, were 2 more words. Response received. I don't know how long I stared at that message. I don't even remember closing the file. I just remember one thing, the feeling that something had been waiting for us, and we had just told it where to find us. You see, the thing about the moon, it's been silent for millions of years, but silence doesn't mean empty. Silence just means something is listening, waiting. And now we have its attention, and I don't think we're going to like what happens next. You ever notice how nobody really talks about the moon? Sure, we've got movies, documentaries, and a bunch of conspiracy theories, but when was the last time anyone seriously asked, what's actually up there? I'll tell you why. Because the people who did aren't around anymore. After I found the Apollo 11 transmission, I knew I had two options. I could stop digging, or I could figure out what the hell we contacted that day. I chose option 2, obviously, and that's how I found the restricted footage. NASA keeps public archives. You've probably seen them. Grainy videos of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin bouncing around, planting a flag, saying iconic things. That's what we got to see. But that's not all they recorded. Because while Armstrong and Aldrin were doing their official mission tasks, their comms weren't just going to Earth. They were also being intercepted. And someone, or something, sent something back. I don't know who tried to erase the footage, but they didn't do a good enough job, because after a week of pulling classified logs, I found a file that wasn't supposed to exist. A single video. No title, no description, just a timestamp. July 20th, 1969, 22:17 UTC. 2 minutes after Armstrong stepped onto the surface. I hit play. The first few seconds were normal. Lunar surface, crackling audio, the distant hum of the Eagle lander's systems. Then something changed. The transmission glitched, the image distorted, and for a moment, just a moment, there was something else in the frame. Not an artifact, not a camera error, a shadow, not a rock, not a lander part, a moving shadow. And then, the audio cut out completely. NASA never released this footage. They never even acknowledged its existence. But now, I had proof. Proof that when we landed on the moon, we weren't alone. I spent the next 3 days pulling every document I could. And that's when I found the next missing piece. A declassified transcript from the Apollo 11 mission. One that had been edited before release. But the original, the one I found, it had an extra exchange. Something that happened right after Armstrong's first steps. Something we weren't supposed to know. Here's how the public transcript reads. NASA. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But the real transcript? It keeps going. NASA. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Armstrong, static. Houston, we have a problem. NASA. Say again, Eagle. Armstrong. We're not alone up here. NASA. Clarify, Eagle. Armstrong, whispering. They're watching us. At this point, I was way past paranoia. This wasn't just a cover-up. This was something nobody was supposed to uncover. And when I cross-referenced the Apollo transcript against the alien warning records, that's when I made the connection. Every single vanished civilization. They all had one thing in common. None of them vanished immediately. They all thought they were safe. For a while. Some lasted months, some lasted years. But eventually, they all disappeared. Like something was waiting. Like it wanted them to feel safe first. And if humanity was following the same pattern, our time was running out. I tried to warn people. I sent my findings to every government, agency, and independent researcher I could find. But before I could get a single response, NASA announced Artemis 3, a brand new manned mission to land on the moon, a mission scheduled for next year. Here's the part that terrifies me the most. This isn't like Apollo. This isn't just a landing. This is a colony. We're staying. And if the pattern holds, that's exactly what it has been waiting for. We thought the moon was empty. We thought it was just a lifeless rock. But if that's true, why does every alien species in the galaxy refuse to go back? Why do they all warn against it? Why did every other species that landed vanish? And why, after 50 years of silence, Is something sending a signal back? We made one mistake. We thought the moon belonged to us. We were wrong, and I think we're about to find out who it really belongs to. You ever feel like you're watching a horror movie in real time? You know the moment, the one where the main character finally figures it out, but they're already too late? That's where I am right now, because humanity just did the one thing we were never supposed to do. We went back to the moon. And now, something is coming back for us. By the time I pieced everything together, it was too late to stop Artemis 3. The mission had already launched. 6 astronauts, 2-year deployment, the first permanent lunar settlement, and the worst part? They landed right where every vanished species had landed before. The South Pole, the same place, every single time. I tried to warn them. I sent everything. The Apollo 11 transcripts, the classified footage, the alien warnings, the missing astronaut reports. Nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to believe it, until the Artemis 3 crew saw it for themselves. The first few days were fine. Routine setup, equipment checks, lunar surface analysis. Then the anomalies started. Equipment failures, distorted transmissions, unexplained power fluctuations. And then, on day 7, the crew sent this message. Houston, we've got movement up here. I was watching the live feed when it happened. Everything looked normal, just 6 astronauts doing their work. And then, the shadows changed. Not crew shadows, not lander shadows. Something else, something moving. And then, the feed cut out. It stayed offline for 6 hours. When it finally came back, there were only 5 astronauts, and nobody would talk about it. NASA's official report said it was an accident, equipment failure, suit breach. But the other astronauts? They wouldn't look at the cameras. They wouldn't say his name. They just kept repeating, "It wasn't supposed to see us." We should have left. We should have evacuated immediately. But we didn't, because the next morning, a new signal started transmitting. This time, it wasn't coming from the moon. It was coming from Earth. I tracked it to one of the oldest radio observatories on the planet, an abandoned Cold War-era station, decommissioned decades ago. No active systems, no satellites. But suddenly, it was broadcasting a signal that matched the pulse from the moon. Something beneath the Earth was responding, and whatever it was, it had just woken up. I arrived at the observatory the next day. It was supposed to be empty. It wasn't. Inside, the old systems had turned themselves on. Ancient machinery, dusty and rusted, now glowing with activity. And in the center of the room, a single terminal screen, flickering, waiting. And then, it typed a message. I don't know who or what was on the other end, but I know one thing. It wasn't human, because the first thing it said was, "It's too late. They're already here." I tried to respond. I tried to type, "Who?" But before I could finish, the ground shook. The entire observatory trembled. And then, the moon answered. Every single sensor on Earth went haywire. Seismic activity, electromagnetic pulses, communications blackouts. And then, from the Artemis 3 crew, a final transmission. Houston, we were wrong. The moon isn't a tomb. It's a door. And then, silence. I don't know how much time we have left, but I know one thing for sure. Every vanished civilization, they weren't wiped out. They were taken. And now, it's our turn. We thought we were explorers. We thought we were pioneers. But we weren't the first. And we were never meant to be the last. Something was waiting for us to return. And now that we have, it's coming back for us.